Welcome to another episode of the Strong Family Project podcast. I'm Joe, back again with Mel on a very important topic for you today on you are the average of the 5 people you hang out with the most. It's called a lot of averages, and simply put, you got to protect the people you hang out with and the people that your kids hang out with. And I'm going to give you 4 strategies today. I know Mel's got a list too, but for me, I'll have 4 strategies and teaching topics that you can help frame the discussion with your children. Mel, read us in. I stammered through that. Get us started. Pick up the slack for me.
I can do that. Welcome back to the Strong Family Project podcast, where we guide you on the path to raising confident, independent, and resilient children in a strong family environment.
You did it.
Thank you.
A little flustered we don't have our 13-year-old auto video tech, so I'm working the cameras too. For those of you who are joining us on YouTube, I appreciate it. For those of you who are listening on the audio podcast platforms, we appreciate it as well. Take a moment, drop a review if you find this useful. We need that feedback to continue. We've shot a couple question and answer episodes now, so if you have questions, go visit us at strongfamilyproject.com. Email's right in the bottom. Submit your questions, or you can put them in the YouTube comments. So Mel, why don't you explain why this is important?
Sure. There's another quote that I think of when we talk about this, and it's, show me your friends and I'll show you your future. So the people that we as adults spend time with, the people that our children spend time with, not only impact you in the moment, but they actually define what your future is going to be like. So this is so important because we all are social beings. We all spend time with people. And you spend time with your family. That's true. Some people spend more time with others than other people. However, when you spend time with people, we're going to be talking about the importance of being very choosy and very deliberate in who you spend time with, and then also guiding children to be decisive about that as well.
And honestly, the lessons are the same. We'll talk about it from a us perspective as adults, and then we'll give you the lessons you can teach your kids. But if you're taking notes throughout the episode, the lessons are essentially the same. With most things, you role model it first. You live the life like you're trying to teach your kids, and then from those lessons that you learn, you then pass them on to your children. Just like with finding core values, with a lot of stuff we're talking about, we'll get into some family fitness episodes, some family habits episodes. The answer is really always the same. Here's how you can get the habit yourself, and therefore you will now have the skill that you can teach your children. And so it's important to live the life, and I think that's important to mention at the beginning because it needs emphasis. We are the toughest people to hold ourselves accountable to. Said another way, like it's easy to let ourselves slack.
I think about how we have to be self-reflective in all parts of the path that we presented in the first 7 episodes, but also in this. So if you reflect on the choices you make and how you spend your time with other people, that is how you're role modeling it for the kids. So I think there's that, you need to have that willingness at the forefront to reflect and say, okay, let me take a look at who I spend time with and how is that shaping who I am and impacting me and then as a role model. So self-reflection is a really important piece of this.
Yeah, today's chat is really derived out of what Jim Rohn, R-O-H-N, a personal development person from the 90s who's had a big impact on our lives. You can see a lot of free videos from Jim Rohn out there on YouTube still. He passed away a few years ago. But he had a very good way of teaching things, and he was teaching something called the law of averages. And the law of averages states, like, if you hang out with 5 people, you are going to be roughly the average of those skills. If you make 10 sales calls and you close 5, the way to close 50 is to make 100 sales calls. It's the law of averages. It's just how numbers work. And when it comes to people and interpersonal relationships, it's not an exact science. But if you hang out with 5 people who are drinkers, you'll be the 6. If you hang out with 5 entrepreneurs, you'll be the 6. If you hang out with 5 people that align with your religious beliefs, you will become probably the 6. If you hang out with 5 people who volunteer at school and pour themselves into education, you'll probably be the 6th. It's not like you're going to hang out with 5 drunks and then all of a sudden you're going to be the exception to that rule and become the successful entrepreneur. That's not how life works. And sometimes it's overwhelming as a parent to say, all right, how do I teach my kids who to hang out with? And how do I protect them from that situation where they're hanging out with 5 people who don't align with our family's values? It's likely they're going to become the 6. Now, for my groundwork, Mel, I know you have a lot of notes, so I don't want to step on your toes. You can jump in here in a second. It comes back to establishing your core values and your standards so you know what you stand for, so you're not easily influenced into those circles. Teach your kids that so that they understand what you stand for and they understand what they stand for, so that when they get the peer pressure and influence, they're not as swayed.
Yes, I was thinking the same thing, how you need to start with those core values and not just thinking of them and presenting them, but that constant gentle pressure on a daily basis or weekly at your family meetings especially, to keep reminding your kids of what the family values are. And you really want their buy-in. They really need to believe in these values and not just think that there's something on the wall or something that mom and dad talk about sometimes. It needs to be the culture of your family to constantly and consistently reiterate and try to embody those values. It's part of why in the family meeting podcast, we talk about how we start our family meeting with everybody giving an example of how they embody a value. So the kids aren't just hearing it, but they're actually making deliberate choices during their week to live by the values. So I think that's one of the first most important things to make sure that's happening in your family.
Yeah, so I hate to make the assumption, but we have to assume you've established the values by now. We've talked about it to a long extent. Now, if you're dropping in on this first episode, if this is your first episode, you can go back to episode 1 where we explain core values and how to pick them. You can visit strongfamilyproject.com where we give you the path for free. You can download the PDF. You can see our notes on core values. We have 50 sample core values. Basically, we're not going to keep beating this drum throughout the full episode. You have to establish your values and standards. If you want to have kids that uphold values and standards, you have to define them. And it sounds so simple, but most people just ignore it. Like, we want to be vaguely good. That's not good enough for a family. You have to establish concretely what you stand for and your standards. And while there are other values that you can embody, these kind of sub-values that aren't core values, you have to establish your standards and core values, or else everything's going to just be some sort of lukewarm jello life of mediocrity. And I just hate that.
And then when your kids are out at school, and I'm sure that some families that listen are homeschooled, and that's a wonderful path to take. But if your kids are in public school, and even if you're in homeschool and you're probably part of a group that meets, you have to be very aware that if you don't have core values set up, your kids will be easily influenced by whatever values other kids bring to the table, whether they're positive or negative. And my son came to me one day this week and he said, I'm making a group of friends at school and I think they have good values. And I said, how do you know that? And he said, one of their families raises chickens and he talks about these kind of things that we value at home. So he's starting to take the values that we talk about and apply them to how he's choosing his friendships. And I thought that was a really great reflection on just what we're doing is working. It's slow and it's slow progress, but I like that through the consistency that we've shown, he's applying, how do I choose friends? Who do I look for? What kind of qualities do I look for in a friend?
I'm going to go back a couple episodes when Mel said take some time to reflect. It was on the Stay Calm episode. So you have your outward reactions, your inward reactions. And you can separate that by reflecting and figuring out why you believe what you believe and things like that. I want to put some more thought around these core values versus other values, because you should not attend every argument you're invited to, and you shouldn't use all your relationship capital, episode 9. You shouldn't use all your relationship capital fighting every fight and every value that comes across. And here's a great way to figure it out. Reflect back when you were in high school and think about the values that you soaked in from the people around you. And if it's Mel's wearing those wide bottom jeans in the puddles and stuff,
So
listening
true.
to 90s alternative, like those are values, these kind of pop culture type values, which you don't necessarily go against or for your higher character values. And you don't have to fight all those fights. You should analyze them and see if they're going on the right path, but they're going to pick up a lot of stuff from society, and that's not all bad. So I want to make sure I emphasize that. Think back of when you were in high school and the stuff you picked up that was good, and then the character traits that you picked up and whether they were good or bad. And that's like, work ethic? Are you hanging out with kids who do their homework versus just skip it and think it's cool to not do it? Do the minimum possible to get by? Or you can listen to whatever music you want, you can play whatever sports you want, but are you holding the higher standards of being someone who gets good grades and cares about other people and is generally kind? So just want to put that tactic to you. Reflect back, write down some things that you learned from people that were fine, even though your parents might not have said, hey, don't dress like that, that's weird. Every generation says that to every next generation. I say it now. I hate those little skinny jean things. I don't know how people wedge them. I don't know. I don't want to get off topic.
But this reminds me.
The clothes these guys wear these days, every generation says things like that. Oh, the music these kids listen to. Okay, those probably aren't the fights you're going to have unless it's directly against your core values. So there's some things you just let go, let them choose their own path on, but you hold the standards, and your core values are the things you fight for and you establish.
And in reflecting back to what values you picked up as a kid, this translates into something that I've been saying to my kids. They'll come home and they'll describe a child. They'll say, this girl's coming in and she's wearing really tight clothing and lipstick. And I simply ask, I don't judge, I simply say, what does that tell you about her values? So I'm trying to teach the kids to look at other people's behaviors in the classroom or wherever they are, and simply ask yourself the question, what does that person value if they're behaving that way? Okay, a kid comes in and all he talks about is video games. Okay, what does he value? And does that fit our family values and the values that you want to embody? So I think just asking that question instead of just saying, that's stupid, it makes you pause and has the child really think about, what does that mean about this person? Maybe that person's mom is a makeup artist and they just love to do that and it makes them closer to their mom. Maybe it's because they want to draw attention to themselves, and maybe that's not so healthy. So I think just asking that question allows your child to learn a little bit more a skill of how to process who values what and who you'd want to choose to spend time with. And this leads into another strategy that I came up with during the evening debrief with the kids. So that's one of the pieces of the path. And this is oftentimes in the evening. Topics will come up that might have not come up during the day for whatever reason. Kids feel more comfortable. And my son brought up a couple topics. One was there's a boy who he loves to play soccer with on the playground, but he sometimes can be a mean kid, and that's probably not somebody that I would invite over to play with. Or another kid who was giving everybody gum on the bus, and you're not supposed to have gum. But then the kid also, in a different situation, stood up for my son, and he really appreciated that. So I taught them, pretend that there's like a file cabinet in your mind, and there's a file for every person that you know. And a lot of times people aren't just good or just bad. And you file under that person's file cabinet in your mind the things that you like about them, the things that you are concerned about, and then you can make a decision. Is this person someone who's moving me forward or pulling me back? Is this someone that, sure, I can hang out with them at school, but maybe I wouldn't want to invite them over for a more extended hangout time? And I think that helps kids to think about their brain as something more tangible than just, it's up in your head somewhere. And that seems to work with them. So whenever they bring up a value or a behavior of a child, I'm like, okay, file it in your file cabinet. Keep an eye on what this kid is like and how they behave. And do you think that that you will be pulled forward towards good values and the values that you embody with this person in your life?
I think you made a good point there. It's not like you're mean or judge this person as bad. It's like sometimes they can be my school buddy, but they're probably not my hangout buddy. Like we don't want them on the inner circle, but they can be part of your life because you're in the classroom with them. And having those discussions with the kids are key. I really just can't get over the ridiculous clothes kids wear these days. It's very distracting now that came up. I was in the transition phase for people who played basketball. I distinctly remember my middle school basketball, we were still wearing the Larry Birds, like the shorty shorts. Then we get to high school, you got the longer ones. I was brought to popularity by the Fab 4, Fab 5 at Michigan, and their not championship run. And then ever since then, it was longer shorts, and all of a sudden the kids are back to wearing the Larry Birds. Like we couldn't wait to get rid of those things because they were like, your bottom of your pocket was like below the bottom of your shorts. It was so uncomfortable to wear and run around with your legs out. And I saw a funny picture yesterday. Never watched the show when I was younger. Pee Wee Herman in like that gray little suit he would wear and do all those silly things. And people are like, you used to make fun of this suit. Now your kid's wearing it to prom. That is what kids are wearing these days. But my point to that is there are things that you shouldn't pick on because that's what they want to do as part of their kind of impact by society. They're not going to stand up against everything, so just choose the important things.
Yeah, self-expression is part of that too. I used to wear all kinds of necklaces, these string ones I used to make, and I think it drove my mom a bit crazy. And my intention was just, I just like doing it and I just express myself. So it's which battles are you going to pick? If it's something a bit more extreme, then sure. That might be something you want to address, like you said earlier, if it goes against your values really strongly. But I just remember that because there is this, especially when you enter the teenage years, this push and pull of maybe your teenager's going to start to consider what their values are over what the family values are. And of course, they will eventually be their own independent individual. But also goes back to why starting out the core values when they're really young is powerful, because it just becomes part of who they are.
Would you like to go next? You want me to go?
Well, I think I covered some of the things I wanted to. And since we're talking values again, which is so tied into this, I think maybe you touched on this already, but we've been struggling with this a little bit because our kids are making friends and there's not going to necessarily be a perfect situation, but we really try to discuss with the child, especially like maybe on the way to the kid's house or whatever, and just talk about, remember what our values are. And sometimes things will come up at other families' homes that maybe intrigues you, but it doesn't necessarily fit our values. You need to be courageous enough to stand up for what you believe in. And that's just a constant, gentle pressure thing. So that was what was on my mind. Maybe you could reflect on that more.
Nope.
Okay.
I want to hit the summary on this because I want to make sure that people are engaging here. So the concepts are, go ahead and reflect on the values that you took from your friends and the ones you took from your parents. Hopefully your parents are the ones that are the higher level character values, and that is the approach you'll take with your kids. You have to give a little when it comes to some, but help them navigate those situations like Mel was talking about on who's the hangout ones at school, who really has the values that you can let into your inner circle, be part of your 5. I think those are great points. I have a couple more that I want to get into because it is easy to say, let's talk about the kids, because a lot of these podcasts are parenting podcasts, what parents do to kids, and we're not about that. That is a piece of the puzzle, but this is a family podcast, and so we also have to role model it. So I want to give you a couple mindsets that you can chew on and perhaps adopt on how you can role model it to make your life easier when it comes to teaching the kids. It'll be so much harder to teach them if you don't follow the path yourself. And so I'm going to ask Mel a hard question here.
Oh boy.
Because I'm sure it's on people's minds. All right, let's say you're living your life and you got your 5 people who elevate you, people that are into their families, are teaching the core values. We had an amazing dinner the other night at a friend's house, Rudolfo's. They had we knew each other from doing hard challenges outside, doing inclines and stuff, and he's got a YouTube channel, I think it's called Ninja on the Mountain, where he's out doing all these crazy hard things. And I met him and learned that he was doing them so fast so he could get back to his family. It wasn't like necessarily a personal thing. So, hey, I got to do this challenge in half a day because I want to be home when my kids get home. That, you know what, that kind of aligns with us. And he invited us over for dinner, and they had a rock wall on their wall, which we used to have in our old house. And all these things are lining up. Like these people have the character, and they have a tremendous homeschool program that they do. They split their schedule with work. I believe she's works in a pharmacy or is a pharmacist, and he's a dentist now, but he does a 3-day shift. She does 2 or 3 days, so they always have someone home with the kids. And so you find people like that, and they're in your circle because they elevate you. I learned a lot from going over there. Even though our values are the same, it doesn't mean that I have the same tactics that he has, and so that elevates us and ups us. Okay, that's the good example. What about my family? What if my family comes over and they don't hold the same values, or I send my kids over to the in-laws and they don't teach what I teach? How do I handle this, Mel?
Wow, that is a hard question.
I can't blame people. I didn't go full silly voice because Mel hates it when I use silly voices because I only have 2. But it's a very reasonable question and one that I would expect us to get. So let's talk about it now.
This is, I'm sure, something that's on people's minds, because sometimes we talk about how it's really important to choose your inner circle, but you obviously can't choose your family. And And this is a really emotional question. I think the important thing, again, like we've been saying this whole time, is have your values set so that you know what you're about. And when you're around someone who doesn't necessarily agree with all your values, choose to live that way, you can stay strong and courageous with it.
That's a very good point. I think most people don't have their values established. That is an opportunity for you and your kids to have a positive impact on their life by having values established. Most go from whatever social media trend is on to the next one. You can look through their pictures and see all their things over their profile. Whatever was popular is just what they adopt. And you can have that opportunity to teach them a different path because they're kind of searching for something to follow in a lot of cases. And yes, they'll hold on to their temporary beliefs and whatever they're signaling at the time initially, but you can teach them by holding true to your values. Go ahead, Mel.
I think ideally, if your family spends a lot of time with you and you are living your values without exception when they're there, it might rub off on them. And I think sometimes that's what people hope for, but we can't depend on that. You need to make sure that you can control what you can control, and that's how you live your life and how you teach your kids. So handling it is, some people could just cut people out of their life. That is one way of handling it. But if that's not an option for you, and I don't think it has to be, unless it's a really toxic situation, it's okay to still continue to live by your values and just be prepared to have pushback. I think handling the pushback.
Be a serious person and just tell them no. Like that is an acceptable answer. When they throw out some BS that they expect you to accept or adopt in your family, just say no. Sometimes you don't have to justify anything.
But I think what I'm trying to say too is if you know ahead of time what you're about, then you take the emotion out of the equation when you've decided ahead of time, because it probably will get emotional at times. We had an example in our Q&A about someone going over and they lost a lot of weight and they're eating a certain way, and then their family was pressuring them into eating cookies and soda. And that person needs to stand up for what's right for them. You don't have to be mean to the other family member, but you need to know what your values are ahead of time and be willing to stand up for them in those tough moments.
Another tactic I like that I'm not sure if Mel likes is use less words. I think serious people use less words because they're not trying to justify it in their own head while they're talking. So if someone steps out of line, you say, hey, we're just not about that here. You don't say, this is the reason why, and this is what we believe in, and this and that. And no, this is just not what we're about. And when you set up stronger standards like that, then you can have the conversations. The person may or may not, I don't want to say may have some value, but they might just stink across the board. But maybe they have some value, and there is some good that they can contribute to your family, and just setting up parameters around the things where just no-go zones for us, that's powerful, and that'll give them a chance to contribute in the way that they can.
It's like with little kids, they need rules and boundaries. So if you can set the rules, so to speak, and boundaries in your home consistently when people come over and not get all defensive, like you're saying, I think that's what I used to do, to get super defensive. And now that we've worked so long on establishing our values, it is simpler to just say, yeah, we just don't do that. Or yeah, we let our kids put their foot up on the chair at dinner or whatever. That's okay. That's what we are about in this family. So I think you're right. Using less words is great. I'm using a lot of words right now. But being consistent and definitive about your boundaries.
Here's the mindset with family, and the statement that I would use versus what I had just said, which is a little bit harder statements. Simply, you don't have to adopt our values, but if you're here, you have to respect them. And then watch them squirm, because don't say anything else. Don't bail them out. And then you can give them something positive to work on. But be a serious person and establish your boundaries. Have a backbone. Like, quit being so soft. That is a great example for you to set with your kids, where you respectfully disagree with someone, but you can still exist in certain situations together. You want to use that line, Mel?
I should. I think I have in some ways. See, I need to do some self-reflection, I think, just like I was saying earlier.
There's someone that we're going to have on the podcast if he finds his voice again. I had him scheduled, but he became ill. A friend of mine, Adrian. And this is a good example. He said he had some buddies that were buddies with his for a long time, and they came over, and his daughter was there. And I forget exactly how old his daughter is, but she's younger. And one of the guys said something that he deemed inappropriate. And so he said, hey, just a second, let's talk in the other room. Took him to the other room and said, hey, you're not going to have conversations like that in my household around my daughter anymore. Do you understand? The guy like felt bad because he thought he was just hanging out with the boys and just sling all that BS around. The guy never stepped out of line again because he was checked. You got to check to make sure that they're living up to your standards, and that's one way to do it. And it was no longer an issue because he was a serious person. He didn't go all wishy-washy like, hey, could you please not mention? It leaves the door open for that person to step on your toes again.
This reminds me too, if you have friends over at your house, or when I sometimes volunteer at school, and if a kid says something inappropriate, now I know it's the school situation, but I will step up and say something to that kid. That's not appropriate conversation for school, but something very direct. I think it's similar to this. And then I just forgot my other thought.
Sometimes with schools, I volunteer, coach track at the elementary school. I've coached a lot of sports. And sometimes, like when they start acting out to get a rise, I'll just say, no. And they'll say, what? Say, I recognize that you're acting out to get a rise out of me. No, I don't have time to pay attention to you. And like they get, that's not the answer I expected. I expected you to get fired up. And I'm not fired up. I'm acknowledging that I see what you're doing. I'm acknowledging that I'm not okay with it. And I'll acknowledge you and I will address it later. And that puts a little fear in them and they shape up.
That's right.
And it's not like I'm not going to yell at them. With just having serious conversations are so much more valuable than you flying off the hook and reacting emotionally to when someone steps out of line. It is much, I say it's much scarier, to like much more eye-opening to them because they expect you to fly off the hook and they expect you to get all sassy based on their reactions and react like a not serious person. And when you do say, no, we're going to handle this one-on-one, we're going to sit down and have this discussion, it scares the crap out of them. People don't have discussions with them, and then they learn. And
I think it does take practice because it can be really uncomfortable unless you're really used to it, especially with someone you really care about. But with your Adrian example, it made me think too, there are some people out there that have lifelong friends. Oh, I met this person in kindergarten. We've been friends forever. And I would imagine the more common scenario is you had these friends when you were younger, then you maybe had different friends in high school, and then you went to college. And I struggle with this too, where do you hang on to those friendships just because you had a common history? And we're talking about role modeling for our kids. Do those friendships continue to bring you value? Do those people align with your family values? And that's a really important reflective question to ask yourself. I think some people just think, we have this shared history, we went through a lot together, so I need to keep this friendship going. That's not necessarily the case, especially if they're not bringing you forward, if they're not helping shape you into who you want to be.
Here's another benefit of deciding who you want to be, deciding on your values and having a backbone and standing up for them. There's a term in marketing which has proven to produce way more communities, tribes, Seth Godin would call it in your marketing world, which is all your marketing should attract or repel. It shouldn't be some middle, like I understand those people over there, but also those people have a very good point, and I'm just going to try to juggle both at once. Yes, you hear me do that with certain topics. Other topics, I draw a hard line because those are the ones that I want to hold the standard on. So when you have a backbone and you have established core values and you stand up for it, you're either going to know right away whether that person is on board with it or they're off, attracted to being in your friend group or repelled. I don't want to hang out with them anymore. It is much more fair to them and you that you have that clarity conversation so that they can go find someone who follows their beliefs and you can go find people that follow your values and standards. You just don't want to have this constant, lukewarmness about a relationship. Either they're in or they're out. And those are the kind of standards that you have with your core values and standing up for them. Give them the opportunity to go somewhere else and find people. Give yourself the opportunity to open up some capacity to make friends with people that are closer aligned with your values. It is better for everyone when you have the values and then you stand up for them.
And I also think that was a really good point. Some people might be thinking, I reflected and I realized now that I have my core values that 90% of who I hang out with is not aligned.
See ya.
Oh my gosh. He makes it sound so easy, but it's not easy. And I think first of all, realizing, okay, how much of the group that you spend time with is actually people that you think you should continue to spend time with, or at least on any kind of extensive basis. But I think once you know what you're about, once you consistently apply your values to your life, you will start to attract people who align. Like the dinner that we talked about that we had with Rodolfo, I think Joe and I went there with our kids and we're like, there's other people out there like this? Like, I don't think we even were open to that understanding until we really started to live according to our values. And then Joe ran into this guy at the incline, which is like a challenge around here in Colorado Springs. And then they hit it off and realized that they have things in common. So I think sometimes the fear is if I say goodbye to these certain friendships, or at least more extensively, will I have anyone to hang out with at all? And I think as soon as you're really about something, that you really establish your values, you will attract the people that will build you up. But that is a bit of a leap of faith.
So, yes, I have 2 more on my topic list, and we have about a 5-minute runway on this episode because I had a big cup of water before we started.
Oh, no.
Yeah, 5 minutes. So here we go. Mel, here's another hard question.
Oh, boy.
What if someone's a really good person, and I consider in my friend group, but they are not up to the standards right now? How do I handle that situation?
So they're not up to my standards as in terms of my values?
Yes. Now they show some interest in it, but do you leave people behind? How do you handle this? It's all emotional, Mel. What do I do?
I think it's important that you not think you can change people, first of all.
That's a good point.
I think sometimes people think if this person just hangs out with me, then they'll be changed for the better, which could happen. But if that's your ultimate goal, I think that's a really tricky place to be. I'm not really sure how to handle that, because I don't think that would be like a let go of them moment. I think there's an opportunity there, and I'm always looking for opportunities. So that's my personality. You're much more quick to put a boundary up than me.
So here's my approach to it, and it does sound more ruthless than your give everyone a chance approach. Mine is, the standard is you can lift them up, but you can never step down to their level. And if you find yourself stepping down to your level, you need to start to disintegrate the quantity of time you hang out with that person. So if they are truly looking to better themselves, then absolutely try to help them by role modeling and holding high standards, teach them and elevate them and give them an opportunity to grow. As soon as they try to grab you and pull you down, let's start going out on the weekends. Let's start skipping things that are important. Let's play video games online versus family time or something like that. Then the time needs to be disintegrated. So it completely depends for me, not where they're at, but where they want to go. So if they're on the path and they want to go there, and yes, we all can get off path a little bit, giving some leeway there, giving some grace, but always holding your high standard, reaching down, pulling up, and then hopefully they'll go past you and then they'll do the same to you. However, if you step down to go get them, that's where I draw the line. You've lowered your standards and you need to become a more serious person and not do that.
And I immediately think about the kids. You know, if you are struggling, if you see one of your kids are struggling, and this is part of that relationship, part of the path where you're keeping a tab and a pulse on the different relationships in the family. And let's say there's a kid that's struggling. One of the questions to ask yourself is, who are they spending time with? Maybe the people they're spending time with are pulling them down and not lifting them up. So that could be one of those questions to consider when someone in the family is struggling, is who have they been spending their time with? Where have they been putting their energy?
And my last one I want to talk about, of my 4, because we got that 5-minute time limit. I was listening to the Keep Hammering Collective yesterday with Cam Haynes and Kip Folks, one of the founders of Under Armour. And I haven't listened to all the episodes, but I happened to catch just one. And almost offhanded, Kip Folks, the gentleman that helped found Under Armour, is now with Origin, mentioned this briefly, almost in passing, but it was almost what I took the most out of the 2-hour podcast they had, which was, when 2 objects touch, they always leave a mark. And you have to keep that in mind. You're not immune to that just because, though they're family, so I will let them affect me negatively. Or they're just, like, I've been around with them forever, like Mel said. So their energy and their core values, and when you touch socially and they are in the same room, it leaves a mark on you and your energy and your values. There is nothing that is immune to this. And he mentioned it in reference to when he was studying, his professor was teaching this about forensic science. And so if someone uses a tool to break into a door, whatever that tool is, screwdriver, little tool, it will always leave a mark on the door, like even so small that you can't see it. But if you were to study it, you would see some of the metal transferred to the doorway. And whenever two objects touch, my hands touch now, something came from this hand and just went to the other hand. They always leave a mark. And so it might be small, it might be nuanced, but it will leave a mark on you. And you can't ignore this because it's inconvenient. You can't ignore it because it's family and it's inconvenient to have these conversations. And you can't ignore it because your kids are currently with a group of kids that you would prefer them not to be hanging out with. It just can't be ignored because these influences are happening on a every single interaction basis. And so it is important for you to tackle this topic. Mel, I'll give you your final thoughts and I'll refresh my 4 and then we'll land this plane.
Sounds good. I think I'm going to go back to self-reflection. I think so much of people oftentimes will just live their life based on whatever comes to them, whichever way the wind blows. And we are trying to help you on this path to becoming more deliberate with your choices, deliberate with your values, deliberate with your kids. So I think the more you can reflect on yourself and how you're spending your time and how the people you are with influence you, and this could even be coworkers as well. I think that self-reflection will only bring you forward and help your kids to see how you're role modeling this. So take the time, even if it's difficult, to reflect on where you're at with your core 5 people.
My quick refresher, thank you, Mel. First, there's a misconception on what kindness is in this country today, and I've written on it in my kids' book, and we can do a whole another episode on it, but kindness is not you stepping down to accommodate someone else's low standards. Kindness is you holding the standards and giving them a vision to be attracted to, or they can be repelled by it and go choose something else. And that is kind to both of you. So kindness is holding your standards, and no, you're not a jerk about it, but you just communicate in the ways that we gave in this episode. Second point, attract or repel. Have a backbone, stand for things, and you'll find more people will be attracted to hanging out with you versus just being wishy-washy, trying to cling on to a different group. Define your values, attract or repel, get to be with the 5 people, 6 people, 7 people. We don't have the capacity to hang out with everyone. Get to be around the people that actually elevate you. There are 331 million people in America. You can find 5 to 7 that will elevate and improve your life. Third, when objects touch, they leave a mark. Fourth, law of the averages. You can't fight this. You can't be the one out of your friend group that takes a different path and still always hangs out and does the things that they do, because the things that they do produce the results that they get. And the things that you want to do are going to produce the results that you want to get. And sometimes those are different. And so I'll relate this one more time with parenting, and I'll pass it back to you, Mel. To win more, you have to lose more. People say, I tried this tactic with my kids and it didn't work. Try 10 more. To be able to do is, you're not going to win 100%. If you're a basketball player, you want to make more shots, miss more shots. You need to take more. You might make 50%. And so if you take 50% and you shoot 10 shots, you made 5. You take 100 shots, you made 50. To make more shots and to influence your kids more and to have more with your family, you have to accept that not all of them are going to go in, and use those as learning opportunities versus reasons to quit something that is very worthwhile, like figuring out who the heck they're hanging out with and role modeling it in your life. Mel, finish this up.
So I enjoy listening to the Dennis Prager Fireside Chats, and he's brought this up several times, and I've only listened for a couple months, how people need to put as much energy into their finding friends as they do into finding their spouse. He calls it kindred spirits. You need to find kindred spirits. And he almost made a joke the other day where there should be, like, is it Tinder that people find? Is that the dating app?
Match, Tinder, I don't know.
Okay, whatever. He was making the joke where there should be an app like that for finding friends, because that's how much effort you should be putting into the friendships instead of just going with whatever roommate you had in college or whatever kid is sitting next to you in class. There should be more effort put into choosing your kindred spirits. That was pretty interesting way of putting it.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Strong Family Project podcast. Do follow along on your favorite podcast player. Leave a review and a rating. Make sure you follow and hit that little notification bell on YouTube, because we do have some exclusives coming up there at Strong Family Co. on YouTube. But you can find it all. Our hub is strongfamilyproject.com. Get on the path, get the core values, which is a big foundational piece that we're talking about even today. And we look forward to talking to you on the next episode.